Deep within the Vatican lies a place where even cardinals are not allowed to enter. Behind thick walls, documents are stored that have the power to rewrite history and tarnish the Church's image. For centuries, these archives have been referred to as secret, and for good reason. What is the Vatican hiding from humanity? Why are some documents declassified with trepidation, while others remain classified as never? This is a tale of power, fear, and truth that people are afraid to speak aloud. Imagine a library you can't get into, not for money, not by connections. The doors of this library are guarded not just by locks, but by laws, secrets, and age-old prohibitions. Its corridors go deep into not only the walls, but into the history of mankind. This library is the Vatican's secret archives, one of the most mysterious places on the planet. Officially, it is no longer called secret. In 2019, Pope Francis renamed it the Vatican Apostolic Archives to, in his words, rid it of the mysticism. But this decision, strangely enough, has only made things worse. Interest in the archive has grown, and the amount of speculation has doubled. Because everything that is called apostolic is still inviolable. The archive did not appear suddenly. Its roots go back to the early Middle Ages, when the papal power became not only spiritual, but also political. Documents began to accumulate. All the pontiff's correspondence, decrees, epistles, chronicles, everything was collected and carefully preserved. Gradually, it turned from a chaotic archive into a centralized memory organ. And from that moment on, it was closed. So much so that legends began to circulate about it. In the 16th century, under Pope Pius IV, the archive got its own building for the first time, on the territory of the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. It was then that the first concept of it as a separate institution appeared. However, it became truly secret under Pope Paul V in the early 17th century. Since then, access to the archives was allowed only by special admission. Only the pontiff and his trusted cardinals could enter the rooms where sensitive documents were kept. Even historians of the Church had no access. The Latin word secretum in the name does not mean secret in our sense. Rather, it translates as private. But over time, the word has come to be associated with concealment. Because, and this is important, over the centuries, the archive became the repository of not just papers, but the mechanism of power. It contained evidence, dirt, confessions, treaties with states, lists of heretics, reports of the Inquisition, and even, as some scholars have argued, prophecies that were inconvenient to the Church itself. From the 17th century until the 19th, the archive remained completely closed. Only in the year 1881 did Pope Leo III grant access to selected historians, after years of pressure from the scholarly community. But access was limited. You could not copy, photograph, publish everything. And most importantly, most of the collection remained closed, and remains to this day. So the secret archive became more than just a repository. It became a symbol of what the Church chooses to hide, even centuries later. Historians call it the heart of the Vatican's memory. And those who believe in conspiracies call it a Pandora's box, best left unopened. But what exactly do these halls hold? Who keeps an eye on them? And what secrets have already gotten out? It's time to go further, deeper into the archives. Inside the Vatican, there's a place where most cardinals have never set foot. Strict doors, massive walls, semi-darkness of halls where documents have been accumulated for centuries. This is the inner workings of the Apostolic Archives, and it still amazes with its austerity and secrecy. In fact, the archive is not one room or even one building. It occupies about 85 kilometers of shelves spread over hundreds of rooms. Some of them are ordinary archival vaults, but there are also real secret rooms, the entrance to which is open only to a few. All this space is inside the Vatican Palace complex, in an area completely isolated from tourists and pilgrims. Access to the archive is regulated with almost military strictness. After the reform of Pope Leo III at the end of the 19th century, only accredited researchers can get into the archive. A special application must be submitted, describing exactly what you want to study and why. And even if access is granted, you will be given only strictly defined documents. Trying to request anything is impossible. There is no free search, only a specific query on a known index. The most classified documents lie in halls where even researchers are not allowed. These sections of the archive are protected not only physically, but also legally. The decision to declassify certain documents is made personally by the Pope, and only he can lift the ban. Sometimes this is done for political reasons, sometimes under pressure from the scientific community. But most often, silence. The archive is guarded by a professional Vatican gendarmerie and is subject to an internal system of digital and physical controls. Despite its technological sophistication, the archive is still largely analog. The vast majority of documents are not digitized and can only be accessed in person in the reading room. There are also a kind of guardians of the archives, special clerics and historians who make sure that access to certain materials is strictly within the limits of what is allowed. They also help interpret the ancient texts, as many of them are written in Latin, Greek, Old Italian, or even Coptic. Thus, an archive is not just a place to store documents. It is a carefully guarded structure whose main resource is not paper, but knowledge control. And the more you try to learn, the more obvious it becomes. The most important materials are still kept in the shadows. Sometimes the doors of the archive are ajar. And every time that happens, the world learns something that challenges the official version of events. The declassified documents don't just clarify history, they rewrite it. One of the most famous examples was the publication of the Galileo case. For more than 300 years, the Church claimed that Galileo was condemned not for science, but for insolence. However, in the 20th century, after the discovery of the relevant acts in the archives, it became clear. The great astronomer was recognized as a heretic precisely for his scientific views. His trial turned out to be not just a formality, but part of a deliberate campaign to suppress dissent. Another striking example is the documents related to the Vatican's role in World War II. For a long time, the public accused Pope Pius XIII of acquiescing to the actions of the Nazis. The archives, opened only in the 21st century, indeed showed that the pontiff knew about the Holocaust, received reports on the extermination of Jews, but preferred not to intervene directly. This caused an international scandal. Although some documents showed Vatican efforts to help Jews, the overall picture seemed overly cautious and even cowardly. There were some lesser-known but no less disturbing findings. For example, the declassified materials of the Inquisition. Until recently, these documents were thought to have been destroyed or irretrievably lost. But in the early 2000s, it became known that the Vatican had all along kept thousands of pages of interrogation reports, sentences, and confessions obtained under torture. These materials do not just shed light on the mechanisms of church terror. They demonstrate how the Church systematically eliminated undesirable dissenters, justifying itself by care for souls. The disclosure of the so-called secret correspondence of the popes with European monarchs has caused special attention. These letters concern not only spiritual matters, but also quite mundane politics, overthrowing kings, maintaining dynasties, influencing elections, wars, and armistices. Some documents indicate papal involvement in coups and secret agreements that determined the fate of entire countries. And this is only a small part of the open. Sometimes in the hands of historians fell and truly mystical documents. For example, a list of prophecies attributed to saints or visions allegedly received in the Vatican. Some of them concern future wars, catastrophes, and even the fall of the Church itself. One such text, known as the Prophecy of Saint Malachia, predicts the end of the papacy after the reign of a pope who will be Peter of Rome. Although the Vatican has never officially recognized these texts as authentic, their preservation in archives for decades raises a host of questions. An interesting case occurred in 2005 when a group of historians gained partial access to correspondence between Pope Pius XIII and Benito Mussolini. These letters revealed that the Vatican was secretly supporting the fascist regime, hoping to maintain influence in Italian politics. Another line of documents pointed to papal contacts with Adolf Hitler during the early years of his power. This information was so sensitive that some of it was classified again, ostensibly to clarify authenticity. All this shows the archive is not just a dead repository of the past. It is a place where every declassified page is like a time bomb. It can shatter dogma, destroy images of sanctity, and cause political conflict. That is why every time access to a particular collection is opened, there are long discussions inside the Vatican, assessments of the consequences, and attempts to muffle possible scandals. An archive is not only a source of knowledge, but also a source of fear. And the louder the disclosure, the stronger the feeling that behind closed doors, there remains an even more dangerous truth. But what documents are still out of reach? And why, even in an era of openness, does the Vatican keep them secret? Despite the gradual opening of some holdings, the vast array of documents in the Apostolic Archives remains closed. The reasons vary from the formal, not digitized, to the extremely alarming, could be harmful to the Church and the public. What exactly is the Vatican hiding? First of all, these are documents on Inquisition cases, which concern specific personalities and accusations of heresy. The archives of the Holy Office, especially for the period from the 15th to the 18th century, are still classified. These are the very documents where one can find the names of those burned, the names of the informers, and the records of interrogations. Historians speculate that the Vatican is in no hurry to open these funds for fear of discrediting the Church as an institution of mercy. Some texts probably contain descriptions of brutal executions, legal manipulations, pressure on witnesses, and outright fabricated charges. Another array is the personal files of priests accused of crimes, including sexual abuse. Numerous scandals have surfaced in recent decades in which the Vatican has been accused of withholding data and transferring clergy involved in crimes to other parishes. Many of these cases, especially before the end of the 20th century, are locked away in archives. Some of the material has been requested by courts and commissions, but the Church has often refused to provide it, citing internal canons. Also classified are materials related to the First and Second Vatican Councils. It is not about public decisions, but about internal discussions, debates, and opinions of opposition cardinals, which could show how heterogeneous and politicized the Church itself was. Some historians speculate that there may be materials there that indicate pressure from secular authorities or internal schisms that could have undermined the authority of the Church as a unified spiritual organism. Another mysterious segment is the secret messages and prophecies delivered to the pontiff through mystics and saints. Among them are supposed letters from Lucia dos Santos, one of the 3 children who saw the Virgin Mary at Fatima. It is believed that the so-called Third Fatima prophecy was not fully revealed. According to one version, the Vatican hid a part of the text, which spoke of a deep crisis within the Church itself, the betrayal of the highest hierarchs and the fall of the moral authority of the papacy. Documents concerning the Vatican's relations with the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century are particularly intriguing. Despite the partial disclosure of data on Nazism, the fonds containing correspondence with Francoist Spain, Croatian USTAs, and even South American dictators remain closed. Why are these documents still under lock and key? Perhaps they contain compromising evidence of the Church's involvement in supporting repressive regimes in exchange for maintaining its own influence. Also closed are materials relating to the Vatican's secret missions during the Cold War era. It is known that the Vatican acted not only as a spiritual, but also as a political force, often cooperating with intelligence agencies of different countries. Some have speculated that the archives may contain documents showing cooperation with the CIA, KGB, or Mossad. This information could be damaging to the Holy See's reputation as a neutral party. Within the Vatican itself, a cult of silence persists. Any attempt to learn more is met with polite but firm resistance. Even Pope Francis, known for his openness, faced criticism within the Curia when, in 2019, he proposed a partial reform of archival policy. It turned out that secrecy is not just a tradition, but an instrument of power that is not so easy to give up. All of this begs the question, if, even after centuries, certain documents remain under lock and key, what could be in them that the Church is afraid to make them public? There is no answer, and perhaps there never will be. But this silence creates room for speculation, theories, and suspicions. And while not all of them are credible, the very closed nature of the archive is like a black hole. It attracts speculation. Some of them, the most interesting and plausible, will be discussed next. When information is safely hidden, imagination inevitably takes its place. The Vatican's secret archive has long been a source of theories ranging from the insane to the surprisingly logical. Some of them, despite all their fantasy, are based on facts, and that is why even skeptics are alarmed. One of the most stable versions, is the hypothesis of the existence of an alternative history of Christ. According to some researchers, archives may contain gospel texts that were not included in the canon because they contradicted the official version. For example, the so-called Gospel of Foma or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. In these texts, Jesus is presented not so much as the Son of God, but as an enlightened teacher with secret knowledge. Moreover, one of the texts describes Mary as Jesus' closest disciple, closer than any of the apostles. This completely overturns the traditional church understanding of roles. Another theory concerns the family of Christ. This hypothesis claims that there are allegedly documents in the archives that prove that Jesus may have had descendants, and that this knowledge was deliberately withheld to prevent the concept of an immaculate divine being from being destroyed. Although the Church rejects this categorically, the mere fact that such rumors exist already makes many wonder. What are they based on? Equally intriguing is the theory that there are documents in the archives concerning extraterrestrial life. According to one theory, the Vatican has information about sightings of unidentified objects dating back to the Middle Ages, including descriptions of chariots of fire and celestial stars moving against the laws of nature. Some of these reports, theorists claim, were collected by monks and scholars of the Church, and then covered up as heresy or unacceptable knowledge. There is also the hypothesis that the Vatican has hidden scientific discoveries made during the Renaissance, but deemed too dangerous. These may be works concerning energy, physics, astronomy that were ahead of their time, but were hidden in order to maintain the dominance of official theology. This theory is particularly popular with those who believe that the Church at one time inhibited the development of science deliberately for fear of losing influence. A separate line of theories concerns magical or occult knowledge allegedly gathered during the Crusades. There are rumors that the Vatican took possession of certain artifacts, manuscripts, talismans, books on alchemy, Kabbalah, and Hermeticism. Some claim that the archives may even hold the Book of Solomon, a legendary grimoire describing power over spirits and demons. While this sounds like fantasy, the very fact that the Vatican actively destroyed heretical books during the Middle Ages suggests that not everything was destroyed. Something may have been left behind. Finally, there is a theory about the existence of unpublished prophecies, including those of an apocalyptic nature. We have already talked about the prophecy of Saint Malachia, but there are others, less known, but no less disturbing. For example, texts attributed to John the 23rd allegedly contain predictions of global catastrophes, spiritual decline, and the need for a complete renewal of the Church. Their concealment is explained by the desire to avoid panic. It is important to realize that none of these theories have been proven, but their prevalence and the Vatican's stubborn silence only fuel interest. Mystery breeds speculation, especially when official structures refuse to comment on them. Yet behind these theories lies something more. The question of who controls the truth, and how far power can go when it is concentrated in the hands of those who answer only to God. What makes the archive a place of power? Is it the paper, ink, metal cabinets, and the dust of centuries? Of course not. The power of the archive is knowledge, and knowledge is always power, especially when it's inaccessible to all but a select few. The Vatican Apostolic Archive is not just a collection of ancient documents. It is a mirror of how the Church perceives itself and its role in human history. There, behind thick walls, are stored not only papal bulls and reports, but also traces of doubts, fears, and mistakes. Things that don't fit the picture of holiness. Things that could destroy it if they got out. For centuries, Vatican diplomacy has been built on a delicate balance between openness and secrecy. On the one hand, preaching, pastoring the gospel. On the other, negotiations, intrigue, archives. And while the faithful heard the words of love and salvation from the pulpit, behind the scenes documents were collected, recording everything from confessions of heretics to secret agreements with dictators. So why is the Vatican so afraid to open all of its archives? The answer is simple and frighteningly rational. Because the Church is not just a spiritual institution, it is also the guardian of a historical reality that has been rewritten to fit a certain view. And full disclosure of the documents can reveal how much of that reality has been fabricated. Historians working with declassified documents have repeatedly talked about the phenomenon of archive shock. It is that state when you suddenly realize that everything you knew about an event was a lie or only part of the truth. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that the Vatican itself is not a monolith, but a structure that has survived internal wars, crises, and betrayals. The archive is not just the history of the Church, it is the history of the struggle for control of meaning. Who has the right to say what really happened? Who determines what is worthy of remembrance and what should be forgotten? Today, in the age of digitalization and information openness, the secret archive looks anachronistic, but it does not lose its relevance. On the contrary, its closed nature becomes a litmus test that shows that even in the 21st century, there are areas where the truth is not the right of everyone, but the privilege of the few. Every document that has never been declassified is a lacuna in the collective memory. It is an opportunity for the authorities to save their face, even if it has long been stained. And in this sense, the Vatican Archive is not only a historical repository, but also a mechanism of amnesia. But that is also its weakness, because every new breakthrough, every published letter, every exposed fact brings closer the moment when the truth will win after all. Even if not immediately, not completely, but at least partially. Will all the secrets of the archive ever be revealed? Probably not. Perhaps the most terrible documents will forever remain under lock and key, or have already been destroyed. But the very fact of their existence, even as shadows, already changes the perception of the Church, its history, and its role in the destinies of peoples. While the archive remains silent, it is left to us to speak, to search, to compare, to doubt, not to believe blindly. Because mystery is not only a concealment, it is always a challenge. And everyone who is interested in the archive, who reads, who asks questions, is already participating in this challenge against oblivion, against one-sided truth. And maybe that's what the Vatican fears most.